Hello again, and welcome to Tierah Ruins Things with Science, the podcast about the science of infectious diseases in pop culture. I am Tierah, and I am here again to ruin a movie by describing in heavy detail how they fucked up the science. The unlucky topic of conversation today is the 2021 movie The Tomorrow War, starring Chris Pratt, Yvonne Strahovski, Sam Richardson, Jasmine Matthews, and a bunch of other people. If you want to watch it, and I think it's worth at least one viewing, it's available on Amazon Prime, and you can rent or buy it on all the other usual sites. I saw this movie when it came out, and I got so hung up on how confusing the language around some of the science was that I didn't end up liking the movie very much, simply because it took me out of the suspension of disbelief as I tried to figure out what they were talking about. But I rewatched it prior to writing this episode, and I found it not quite as terrible as I remembered. It's definitely still very loosey-goosey with science. It's way over the top in gore and violence, especially at the end, sort of almost laughably gratuitous. But the alien character design is actually pretty good, and so I guess I don't hate the concept overall anymore. But again, the science was so confusing to me the first go-around that I ended up researching a bunch of stuff that didn't end up being relevant when it came to writing this episode. Overall, it was an okay popcorn movie to stream at home if you're bored and, all your socks are already sorted and folded.
We are you. 30 years in the future.
So the quick summary of this movie is that there is a war against aliens about 30 years in the future, and humans have invented time travel that allows them to come back in time to conscript past humans into coming forward in time to fight for them, because they're losing very badly and humans are about to go extinct. The time travel in this movie isn't like go anytime you want time travel, it's a fixed interval style. This is a term I've just invented as I was trying to recall what other types of movies there are where 2 points in time are connected and you can travel between them, but the time moves forward in both points equally. So if an hour passes in the past, the same hour passes in the future. You can't keep going back in time to the same moment before catastrophe and having infinite chances to fix things, like in, say, Edge of Tomorrow. The only movie I can think of at the moment that also uses this style of time travel is Deja Vu with Denzel Washington. That isn't really a time travel movie, more like a time viewing movie. But in most other time travel movies, the point where you travel to is more customizable. Anyways, I digress. I am not a time travel scientist, so that's all I will say on this. Let's dive into some of the science that is the reason why I chose to cover this movie. First off, there's one really cute moment, sort of near the beginning, where the main character, Dan, goes out to see his daughter, Murray, who is digging a hole in their backyard. Dan asks what she's doing, and Murray says, looking for vaccines. I thought it was super cute, and it's not actually too crazy an idea. So a lot of our current antibiotics, like penicillin and streptomycin, vancomycin, as well as important antifungals, we've gotten all of these from bacteria and fungi, and a lot, if not all, of these live in soil. Not only that, but for the few bacteria we do have vaccines for, like whooping cough, diphtheria, tetanus, most of these are able to live in soil also. So you could go dig a hole, isolate some of these microorganisms from the dirt, and then go develop a vaccine against them. I'm sure most of the people who would listen to a science podcast on infectious diseases know this, but I thought it was a neat little moment. So as expected, the main character, Dan, gets drafted and sent into the future, and when there, by default of having survived the trip and being ex-military, he gets chosen to lead a mission to rescue some biological samples before they get destroyed by all the chaos. Dan and his group make it to the lab where the samples are, and over the radio, the future army scientist who's giving them directions says she needs the blue ampules from the fridge. Now, when Dan finds them and they're shown on screen, I'm pretty sure I said out loud, "Bitch, that's a falcon tube." What an ampule is a little glass tube or a vial about an inch tall, either with a metal lid or a rubber stopper you insert a needle through, or it's a whole sealed continuous piece of thin glass with a lid or topper that you snap off and you can't reattach because you've just broken it. In the lab, we use these to store air-sensitive chemicals or like things that react with oxygen. And you've probably seen one of the ones with the metal lid and rubber stopper when getting a vaccine. What Dan finds are 15 milliliter plastic conical tubes, which are extremely common, but also they're not called ampules. See tierahruinsthings.com for comparison photos so you can see what I'm talking about. So future scientist lady, whose name we don't know at this point, also says there should be 12, but the rack Dan finds has 15 on it. And yes, I paused to count. I don't ask for much, folks. I can suspend my disbelief when required. You know, I liked Venom, even though I don't believe in symbiotic space amoeba. But why should I have to overlook tiny things that take no effort and no more money to have them be right? Maybe if you're out there making a movie and you don't think anyone's going to notice, trust me, someone always notices. I'm like Roz from Monsters, Inc. Always watching. Anyways, when Dan and his team get the tubes, and after enough explosions that you'll want to pull out your phone and find out if this is a Michael Bay film, it's not. He finds out that the scientists of the future are trying to use these biological samples to engineer a toxin to kill the aliens. Okay, well, actually, they have made the toxin, but it only kills the male aliens, and the females are able to survive. This alien society is run a bit like bees or ants, where there's one or very few females with an army of drone males to do the fighting. I assume they did the work off screen to figure out how the female aliens are surviving, but it is revealed that they have an innate antitoxin that neutralizes the toxin before it can harm them. What the scientists are trying to engineer is an antitoxin to make the original toxin effective again. It seems complicated, but I'm willing to bet that some of you may have taken such a drug combination yourself before. This is what antibiotic resistance towards penicillin and other beta-lactam antibiotics is all about. I will post a picture of beta-lactam structures with my sources in the show notes if you're interested, but basically it's a square part of the penicillin molecule. What it does is mimic an essential part of the bacterial cell wall, which is similar, but it's an open bond rather than a square. So this prevents the cell wall from being built, and the bacterium then dies. It can't replicate. Resistance to this involves the bacteria producing an enzyme called beta-lactamase, and that pops open the square, makes it look like the regular building block, so the bacteria can still build a cell wall out of it. So how do we counteract that? In some cases, instead of moving on to a different or stronger antibiotic, you'll get given a beta-lactamase inhibitor along with your beta-lactam having antibiotic so that it works again. So you'll get amoxicillin with an inhibitor like clavulanic acid, otherwise known as amoxiclav. To put this into terms for the movie, they've developed the amoxicillin, but the females have resistance and produce the beta-lactamase, and what the scientists are trying to develop now is the clavulanic acid. They're using future technology to predict a structure of a molecule that will permanently bind to the antitoxin, the beta-lactamase, that the females produce. It has to bind tightly and permanently to the active site of this antitoxin in order for it to be useful. I say, quote, future tech, but we actually have this tech now. It's called computer-aided drug design. There's a lot of really complicated math and physics that go into it, and I am not a complicated math and physics scientist, so I'm not going to delve into that at all. But basically, a computer takes the molecule that you want to bind to or inhibit or whatever, and it comes up with theoretical structures of other molecules that would be able to do that. There are pharmaceutical companies looking into this pretty hard right now because of the immense cost of developing new drugs for the market. One article from Nature that I found said that preclinical studies, which are before the drug is tested in humans, this accounts for almost half of the average $2 billion price tag that it costs to make a new drug. And considering that 90% of all proposed new drugs don't pass clinical trials, there are billions of dollars to be saved if we can just use an AI to come up with likely candidates that act specifically on their target with minimal side effects rather than the traditional trial and error involving digging a hole in your backyard and seeing what chemicals the bacteria and fungi that live there produce. Anyway, so we do have this tech now. It seems fairly straightforward, you would think. But somewhere in the scene where they have this conversation and explain it all, they just go back to calling this the antitoxin inhibitor the toxin again, which is why I think I found it so confusing. I get that maybe they're just using toxin as a shorthand because what they'll be doing is giving the toxin and the antitoxin inhibitor at the same time, and that's a lot of words to say. But there's this whole 75% of a movie leading up to this where they need these biological samples and then they need to develop the antitoxin inhibitor, and then they do. And then it's like they immediately stop referring to it all. But I guess before I digress into perhaps another overly picky rant, let's talk about toxins. Like I said at the top, after watching this movie the first time, I came out of it thinking that the aliens were the ones that produced the toxin and they were poisoning the humans with the darts that they shoot out of their, I don't know what to call them, their noodly-like appendages. They're not tails, they're not arms, they look like tails almost, and they shoot these hard bone spike things. I thought that the humans were trying to come up with an antitoxin because the darts were poisoned, and so I did all this research into venoms and toxins, and then I rewatched the movie, and it turns out that's not the case at all. But I guess you folks benefit because I'm going to give you that info now anyways. There's a couple scenes or shots at the end where they use this toxin inhibitor on a couple aliens, and it's pretty gross. Think the end of Raiders of the Lost Ark flesh melting scene kind of gross. So I'm going to distill a lot of venom info into your brains right now and try to narrow down what type of toxin I think would do that.
Okay, I can survive this. No, you can't. Well, don't laugh. You don't laugh if somebody says they're going to survive something.
So what is a toxin? I talked a bit about toxins and intoxication in the first episode, but I didn't really explain what an actual toxin is. There, I was talking about alcohol in the context of a person being intoxicated, and mentioned a few bacterial toxins that you probably have heard of. Proper toxins are generally proteins or peptides, and peptides are just really short, small proteins. Sometimes a toxin is also a lipid, which is a fat, but I'm not going to cover that because I don't think that will cause the effects that we see in the movie. Toxins, they're found in all areas of life. Bacteria produce them, sea anemones, cone snails, octopuses, scorpions, snakes, bees, centipedes. Even plants and fungi do, and even some molds. Bacteria and fungi are where we get antibiotics and antifungals, like I've mentioned, which I guess would count as being a toxin to the bacteria or fungus it's killing. Before I get too far into the details here, though, I just want to clarify the difference between a venom and a poison. Both are toxins, but a venom is something injected into you through a bite or a sting, and a poison is something that you ingest, like poisonous mushrooms or cyanide. Basically, if you bite something and you die, that's poison, but if something bites you and then you die, that's a venom. I will be talking only about venoms here because the humans did not go around leaving poisoned food out for the aliens to ingest. However, funny story. There's a trivia bit on the IMDb page and also on the Movie Monster fandom wiki that says that originally the past soldiers were drafted, sent to the future, and secretly filled with a toxic substance so that when they were in the future and the aliens ate them, the aliens would be poisoned, but that this plotline was cut from the movie. I couldn't find any corroboration for this except those two sites, which had the exact same wording, so I don't know how true that is. But if that were the case, we'd be talking about a poison and not a venom. After I started looking into venoms, I thought I'd bitten off more than I could chew because I was so overwhelmed with just the sheer amount of different things that venoms can do. You know, as many different things as there are inside your body, as many different tissues, different cells, and different receptors on those cells. That's how many different venom proteins there are and different effects they can have. Most animals that have a venom, they will inject you with a huge mixture of these things, not just a single toxic compound, as I had assumed. Of the most dangerous venomous animals in the world, the top 10 are mostly snakes and jellyfish, but there's also the blue-ringed octopus and cone snails in there. Arthropods, they don't make an appearance until numbers 9 and 10, and I don't want to talk about them because they're gross and I have a phobia, so I'm just going to stick to the top 8. To quickly list them, we have box jellyfish, which are the most deadly venomous animals on the planet. Then there's the inland taipan snake, the blue-ringed octopus, the irukandji jellyfish. Then we have cone snails, just all cone snails, the coastal taipan snake, the Dubois sea snake, and the boomslang. Most of these animals, as you probably guessed, they live in and around Australia and in the Indo-Pacific region, except for the boomslang, which is apparently not a mythical animal and actually lives in sub-Saharan Africa. The box jelly and the irukandji jelly produce similar reactions, which is actually called irukandji syndrome, and it can be experienced from some other jellyfish things also. And of course, the inland and coastal taipans, they basically have the same effects as each other, they just live in different areas. Now, it's too much detail to go into every venom molecule that each of these animals uses, as I found out myself. And in some cases, we don't actually even know what they produce, as there isn't a lot of funding or research to find out. In the case of the irukandji jellyfish, it wasn't until about 2005 that enough samples of this jelly had been collected that a group could actually analyze the venom and see what it does to tissue. That's because these jellies are extremely tiny, only 1 to 2 centimeters across, with tentacles that can be about a foot long, I think. So this makes it very hard to spot, and it is very dangerous to go looking for. If you get stung by one, you have between 5 and 40 minutes, likely depending on the dose, before the symptoms hit you. You'll first experience severe back pain and muscle cramps all over your body, followed by nausea and vomiting. You're going to sweat, your heart rate is going to increase, which is going to cause headache, and in some severe cases, blood pressure that increases so much that your brain hemorrhages. Yeah, that's right, these jellyfish can make your brain explode. If you're lucky to be near a hospital and to be treated so you can survive, the effects can last anywhere from a few hours to several days. As far as I found, there hasn't been a real in-depth study of the exact proteins in irukandji venom or their structures and functions. The study I was looking at just tested the crude venom extract on various tissues to find out what it does. Now, the venom of the box jellyfish has been studied a bit better, so we know that mainly the toxins it contains are hemolytic, so they destroy your red blood cells. Some are cardiotoxic, so they damage your heart, and necrotic of other tissues also. Both of those things, cardiotoxic and necrotic, are through pore-forming mechanisms. That means essentially that the venom molecule punches a hole in your cells, causing them to burst and die. In the case of the taipan snakes, most patients experience systemic clotting, neurotoxicity, and myotoxicity, which means that your neurons and your muscle cells die, respectively, and then also kidney damage from when your kidneys try to process the venom. From the list of case reports I read, there are no cases of cardiac damage, seizures, or tissue reactions like necrosis near the taipan snake bites, but about 80% of people experienced neurotoxicity in the form of a flaccid descending paralysis. That means that starting at your head and slowly moving down your body, you go limp. Generally, this is bad because you need your muscles to do the important things like breathe. The myotoxicity contributes to the long-term effects people experience because if parts of your muscles die, then you're going to have a lot of trouble doing things like walking around and sitting up and holding your neck properly until you can build them back up. From these two animals, it seems like the toxin used to kill the aliens was probably closer to jellyfish necrotic venom than to the taipan snake venom. I'm not convinced it's either one yet, though. Now, the blue-ringed octopus. I'm betting you've heard of this little guy or seen some pictures. They're about 5 to 8 inches across, usually a whitish, beige, or orange color, but when they're angry, they have iridescent blue and black rings all over their bodies. This type of coloration that serves as a warning is called aposematism, by the way, and it just means that the bright color is supposed to be a warning that this animal is dangerous. The blue-ringed octopuses are venomous because they have tetrodotoxin, which is a toxin many other species have, from puffer or fugu fish to all kinds of snails, crabs, frogs, sea slugs, and importantly, bacteria. In the case of the blue-ringed octopus and fugu fish, it is actually the bacteria that make them toxic. They don't produce the toxin themselves. There are even some studies that show that whether or not a fugu fish is toxic depends on what it eats. If it eats food containing bacteria that produce the tetrodotoxin, then the fugu fish will be deadly to eat. But if it doesn't, then you will survive. You can also detoxify a poisonous fugu fish by feeding it food free of the toxin-producing bacteria. Anyways, just a fun little fact for you. For the blue-ringed octopus, the tetrodotoxin is produced by symbiotic bacteria that are mainly in their salivary glands, but also pretty much their whole bodies. And it's not just one species either. There was one study that found they have up to 6 different tetrodotoxin-producing species inside them. Now, unfortunately for our investigation into face-melting toxins, tetrodotoxin is not it. It's a sodium channel blocker, meaning it paralyzes the tissues it comes in contact with, just like the taipan snakes, but it doesn't cause cytotoxicity or gooey flesh explosions. Now, here's a fun thing I thought of while I was putting this all together. Earlier I mentioned that irukandji jellyfish and how its sting causes a fast heart rate and fatally high blood pressure. Well, the group that studied this found that this effect was blocked by none other than tetrodotoxin. So, I don't know, maybe if you get stung by an irukandji jellyfish in the few minutes you have before you start to die, maybe try to find a blue-ringed octopus and slap that little fucker down on your jellyfish sting. Although, since there's no known antidote to tetrodotoxin, whilst the irukandji jellyfish sting isn't always fatal, maybe you're better off taking your chances with the jellyfish than with a small angry octopus that almost certainly will kill you. Moving on to cone snails, they're fascinating, but again, they use mainly paralytics and extremely fast-acting ones at that. Snails are slow, and they need to immediately immobilize their prey or it will get away. The other one that I mentioned is boomslang, and that venom contains a very strong pro-coagulant factors that immediately cause your blood to start clotting. Now, the boomslang, it tends to live in and hunt in trees, so they feed mainly on birds, but also some lizards during the day when their circulation is high enough for a clot to affect them. And you may have noticed a theme here. The type of venom that an animal will have depends mainly on what type of animal it preys on. If it's a faster animal than the predator, the venoms act extremely fast and immobilize or paralyze the prey. If the predator is also fast, like some snakes, then it might not matter if the prey can move away a little because the snake can chase it. In that case, the venoms tend to cause seizures or bleeding, which make the animal thrash around and leave a blood trail, both of which make it easy to track. In the small animals that are the prey of the boomslang, they will just die by stroke from all the massive blood clots. But in humans, because we're so big comparatively, it actually causes hemorrhage because the venom uses up all the clotting factors, but the clots aren't big enough to kill us. There will probably be lots of other internal bleeding from the bite and necrotic factors that the boomslang venom has, which means that, like I said, humans tend to die from hemorrhage from bleeding out after a boomslang bite. Most other animals with cytotoxic or necrotic factors are snake, but also those pesky arthropods that I said I wasn't going to talk about. To get back to snake venoms, most snake venoms contain 2 specific enzymes called phospholipase A2 and L-amino acid oxidase. Their names aren't important for you to remember, it's what they do that's important, and that is cause massive cell death. Phospholipase A2 breaks up phospholipids, which are the type of lipids that your cell membranes are made of. Very bad if you want your cells to hold together. And L-amino acid oxidase produces hydrogen peroxide, which acts like a bomb on the internal parts of a cell and just rips everything to shreds. This is the type of necrosis and cytotoxicity that I would think would be able to produce flesh-melting alien death after, a little bit of Hollywoodification to speed up the effects. So, based on the high degree of cytotoxicity and the speed at which it works in the movie, I would say that the venom they used to make the alien-killing toxin was actually not from any of the top 8 most deadly animals, but it was likely from the king cobra, which comes in at number 13 on the list of the most deadly animals. The king cobra venom is up to 70% just cytotoxic compounds, and a very small amount from probably one bite is enough to kill about 20 adult humans. I am not a snake scientist, but that seemed to be the highest amount of cytotoxicity and the most lethal to me. If there are any snake scientists out there, please feel free to get in touch and chime in. Now, what about antivenoms? I haven't talked much about them yet because, to be honest, they're actually pretty simple for the most part. Many venomous animals don't have effective antivenoms available, though. Traditionally, an antivenom is just the antibodies that are produced against the venom proteins after you get bitten. Your body can, and will, if you survive, produce antibodies against venom, but considering that the antibodies come from mature B cells, which take up to 2 weeks to fully develop, that's not fast enough to help you escape the harmful effects or not die. What people do, though, is administer a non-lethal dose of the venom to an animal, usually a horse or a sheep, and then wait for that animal to create the antibodies against it, and then they take a blood sample, they purify the antibodies, and then they give those to people who come to the hospitals with snake bites. The problem is that if I raise some antibodies to king cobra venom in a sheep, that likely won't be effective to prevent the venom of a black mamba from hurting you. Doctors and clinicians need to have a specific antivenom for each snake bite they're likely to encounter in their area, even if the two snakes produce very similar venoms or toxins that do the exact same thing. Sometimes the antivenoms, the antibodies, they will cross-react a little if the toxins, the venoms are very, very close to each other. They could provide some protection against venom from other species, but it's honestly not that common. Just, an FYI, the most important thing if you're ever bitten by a snake, go to the hospital that's nearest to you and try to describe the snake as accurately as possible, because they're most likely to have the antivenom for the snakes in their area. Now, part of the other issue with antivenoms is that if I inject horse antibodies into you, it might save you from the snake bite, but your own immune system probably will recognize the horse antibody as foreign also. And then you'll have a huge reaction against that on top of your reaction to the venom. There's research going into this, and there are some things scientists can do to make horse or sheep antibodies less reactive to human immune systems, but still function against the venom. But that's way too complicated for me to get into in this show. For the female aliens in the movie to be immune to this super fast-acting snake venom, their response is likely not an antibody one, assuming they even have B cells that will also take 2 weeks to mature and produce antibodies. No, the females have to have just like a broad spectrum enzyme in their bodies just everywhere in high concentration that is ready and waiting to neutralize any toxin or poison they encounter. Not so far-fetched within Hollywood science because, like the antibiotic resistance example I said before, bacteria that have resistance to penicillin are secreting and producing the penicillin inhibitor all the time, not just when there's penicillin around. So, yeah, whatever. I guess I can, accept that. Okay, and that is it for this episode of Tierah Ruins Things with Science. Remember that I am a researcher and not a doctor, so please don't take any of this as medical advice, especially not my tetrodotoxin comment, as this is all just for entertainment. You can follow me on Twitter at Biology Selfies, Facebook at Tierah Ruins Things with Science, and TikTok at Tierah Ruins Things. I will put those names in the show notes, as well as a link to where you can see all my sources and a transcript. I did all the research, writing, and recording for this show, and the excellent theme song was written and provided by James Stratton Crawley, who you may know because he also did the music for the MMORPG Embers Adrift, which was recently released. There's a link to his channels in the show notes if you want to check it out, and he also helped me with the editing. If you have a suggestion for a TV show episode or a movie featuring an infectious disease that you'd like me to cover, email me at tierahruinsthings@gmail.com or get in touch on social media. See you all next time, where I will be talking about The Last of Us and the cordyceps zombie fungus.